Hey everyone, I'm Rather Coherent, and as I get back into Arkham content creation, I also start looking at a bunch of other content creators and seeing what other people are saying to get my own ideas going. And something I saw in another person's tier list was the argument that Rex is like mid-B tier, mid-A tier, I don't remember exactly where they placed them. But this person plays on hard, so bear that in mind. Any character in hard with a 4 in their do something stat is disproportionately worse, and those characters that they're requiring to pass by 2 are even more disproportionately affected than normal. So I understand not having Rex at the top of your tier list when you're playing on hard plus and with on the top of your tier list if you're playing on hard plus with the taboo list. I'm not saying that Rex should always be on the top of everyone's tier list, especially with that context. But what bothered me is they had them so much lower. They had them next to Ursula, which they do have similar stat lines and similar abilities. I can see them getting crushed down comparatively. But there were arguments made about Rex that I found very interesting. Because generally, even though I disagree with a lot of this person's opinions, I can respect the way they got to their final conclusion. And the things they said about Rex are arguments I've never really considered before. And I think most of them, after due consideration, can accurately be called logical fallacies and traps in thought processes. I don't really think I agree with how Rex got where he ranked, but I think looking at the arguments they made is a really good method of trying to learn more about the game and explain more about how I think about the game to other people. So today we're going to be talking about Rex. Specifically, this is a chemistry set Rex. I'm just going to play this in a standalone at some point, probably two-fisted, because I need to test out chemistry set. I'm told apparently it's a card I'm sleeping on, and after looking at it, I'm like, yeah, you're right. I looked at that and I said, that's some dumb rogue shit. I'm not, why would I bother? I've got deduction in class. What are you doing here? But then upon further thought, I was like, you know, if you're testing up 2, then you're probably gonna trigger one of these. And if you're testing up 4 and beating the bag, you're probably gonna trigger one of these. You know, as long as you have fine tuning in play, you get a lot of shots at it, and then steady-handed gives you a +/-1 range, which means that succeeding by 0 to 5 triggers a reward, and you probably don't care too much about the resources because, like, if you're running this, your economy should be handled when this enters play, not later once you resolved it several times. But that still means succeeding by 1 to 5 results in either a card or an additional clue, which is kind of insane and super easy to trigger. So yeah, I'm almost certainly sleeping on this, and it's just a question like which characters are good at running it. Coincidentally, Rex is. Part of the reason Rex is good at running a science deck is because Rex simply doesn't care. One of the arguments made against Rex is his card pool. And this is a 2-part argument. You have to address the level 0 part and the upgraded part, because they're sort of different arguments. Let's start with his level 0 argument. In the past, I've been prone to take a cigarette case, and now that chemistry set exists, there's a lot more competition in that slot. That doesn't make Rex's card pool worse. That makes chemistry set good in him, and that makes cigarette case less good than it otherwise would be because of the competition. If I don't feel obliged to run cigarette case though, I can do stuff like run a 1-up Sparrow Mask and then put 4 practice skills in my deck that just says between these 5 splash cards, Rex just beats the Mythos phase now. That's what my splash did. I think it's pretty easy to see that that's a really good set of cards to add to a level 0 deck. There are plenty of other level 0 cards I'm not running. Quick Thinking, Faustian Bargain, Leo DeLuca, Read the Signs, Hallowed Mirror, just to name a few. Like, no matter what you want your Rex deck to do and what your current deck plan is missing, if you have access to every level 0 card in the game, it's going to really meaningfully improve the quality of the Rex deck. So I think, especially at level 0, the Rex deck is really, really strong and his card pool is great. It's not until other people get the experienced portion of their card pools that Rex's card pool falls behind in any meaningful degree. And at this point, I'm going to diverge a little bit and talk about something that's going to come up later in another point, which is the idea that level 0 is disproportionately more important than anything else. In my tier list, you'll constantly see me rank rogues really low, despite the admission that in scenario 8, they're going to steamroll the scenario. They're going to do their role incredibly well. They're going to just look super impressive the whole time. But they're weak early in the game. They scale up the best proportionally. They have the biggest gap between their starting deck and their final deck. They're like 4 to 8 times stronger depending on specifically how they build and which character we're talking about. They get so much out of their experience, but they start off the weakest and they are going to have the most problems in scenario 1. Scenario 1, which sets the stage for every scenario in the rest of the campaign. Scenario 1, where your victory points echo out and have recursive effects on every other scenario in the game. If you bomb scenario 7 right before the finale, unless that kills you because the story resolution says it does, which does happen in some campaigns, that's not a huge deal. It's not going to impact your final scenario too much, to be honest. But if you bomb scenario 1, everyone dies to rotting remains in the first 4 turns or something, you get 0 experience, your entire campaign's gonna be a shit show. I cannot overstate that power at campaign start in scenario 1 is tremendously, like 2 or even 3 times more important than power at campaign resolution. So the fact that these cards are pretty much all this Rex will ever see from his card pool, he will never get to spend experience on an upgrade, doesn't matter that much to me. Because the fact that he's beating the Mythos in phase 1, in scenario 1 rather, is infinitely more important than whatever I could get from an expanded card pool. But let's talk about that expanded card pool going into future scenarios for other Seekers. And I actually have a Daisy deck up. This was the point of comparison they often used in their video. This is 12 experience. That's in the thick of it plus 9, and there are plenty of campaigns where you can have more than this coming out of scenario 1. As an example, in Forgotten Age, with in the thick of it, and binoculars and full clear of scenario 1, that's 15 experience. Coming over to another deck I've built, I quickly threw together a 13 experience Daisy deck, and I'll talk about that in a second. I just want to compare what you get. In this Rex deck, because Rex doesn't synergize with anything, he has no synergy with his ability to a specific archetype, he has no card pool giving him options that are unavailable to mono Seekers, he just gets to do the best stuff available in Seeker. And like, I want to try out Chemistry Set, it might genuinely be some of the best stuff in Seeker if you're not busy doing something else. So steady-handed and fine-tuning goes in, and I've got 8 experience left at the threshold I set of 12. So screw it, 2 cryptic researches, right? Like I could have gotten deductions and perceptions. The point is that because Rex isn't pressured into doing anything else, he can just get the generically best Seeker stuff available. There is no opportunity cost from your synergy in Rex because there is no synergy. So don't get me wrong, coming over to this Daisy deck, upgrading Old Book of Lore, Abigail Foreman, Miskatonic, Archaeology Funding, and Library Docents, the synergy that has with her ability is absolutely nuts. The amount of power she just gained is bigger than what Rex just gained. But remember, she didn't just buy 2 copies of Cryptic Research. So even though this is a better upgrade than what Rex did, you have to not compare it to nothing, you have to compare it to what Rex gets to do. And as strong as this is in Daisy, the gap between a specific archetype and package in Seeker and just the generically good Seeker shit is actually pretty small. It's worth noting, it matters, but in the grand scheme of things, the thing you're doing instead of buying Cryptic Research is not a massive upgrade. Cryptic Research is nuts, and the fact that you bought a bunch of stuff that wasn't Cryptic Research comes at a cost. This is great. I would upgrade my Daisy deck like this. If I like put a ton of thought into hammering out a completely modern Daisy list, I'd probably end up doing something like this for scenario 2 or 3 depending on the campaign. This looks really good to me. I'm not saying it's bad. What I am saying is you cannot pretend that just because you have synergies, they are free. They come at the cost of Cryptic Research. They delay deduction by 13 experience. Like whenever you upgrade something, you delay something else. And Rex doesn't do that. He just buys the best card in Seeker because he doesn't need to get Farsight like Harvey. He doesn't need, I was gonna say Mr. Rook like Mandy, but that taboo is wrong now, so never mind. What are some other great examples? He doesn't need Eon Chart like an Ursula or Janae Beauregard or Pathfinder. He doesn't need to get Clue Dropper stuff like a Kate Wood. He doesn't need to get any sort of healing synergies like a Vincent Lee. He doesn't need to, all right, Norman's not a valid comparison. Like no one else getting Astronomical Atlas, but still he doesn't need to get Astronomical Atlas like a Norman does. He doesn't have to get a Dream Diary like a Menti fan does. I'm gonna be honest, the stuff Amanda gets is basically just the best stuff in Seeker, right? Like she immediately goes for incredible skills in Cryptic Research. I guess there's a Dream Diary in Amanda, but Amanda really doesn't have much opportunity cost either. She's broken as well, so she does sort of benefit from the same argument. But that's the point I wanted to make with this deck list, is opportunity cost exists. You can't ignore it. You can't say that Rex's level 0 deck building adds nothing, because even if all you want is Mythos Resilience, it helps with that. You want extra actions, throw in a Leo DeLuca. You don't want to lose your ally slot, throw in a Magnifying Glass so that you need to spend less, not a Magnifying Glass, a Lucky Cigarette Case, so you need less actions on Deep Knowledge type things. There is a card in the card pool that makes Seeker better. I will shout from the rooftops that the Seeker card pool is the best, that Harvey Walters lacks for nothing, that their card pool is incredible. But at the same time, there is no Seeker deck where 5 splash from any level 0 can't find a way to make the deck meaningfully better. They're not that far ahead of the competition. They literally don't want cards from elsewhere. So level 0, he's great. Upgrading the deck, he's still great, although other characters start to catch up, I will admit that. But again, I don't really care that it's starting to catch up, because level 0, session 1, that's what matters the most. Even if they were to surpass Rex in the late game, which I'm not sure I agree with, we're getting to this part of the argument, I wouldn't really care, because Ginny Barnes probably surpasses Rex in the late game. You make a 100 experience Grey Man Medallion deck. Once it spends 3 turns putting all its assets into play, it turns out it does disgusting things. But that doesn't matter. Rex is still the better character, despite a setup massive experience Grey Man Medallion deck doing more work, because tempo matters, which is part of why that deck isn't good, but additionally, tempo and the campaign perspective matters. The next idea I want to talk about is the idea of a scaling value on your Investigator card. This is something that was new to me in this tier list. I've never really thought about it as a concept, and now that I have thought about it as a concept, I think the idea is a trap. But let's first explain the idea. With Rex Murphy, his ability will get you a clue. There is no scaling value to this. You can argue that's not really true, that as Rex's deck gets better, he gets more draw results in better test values, and better test values result in more reliability in triggering it. But if we're going to take it for granted he triggers it every turn, which is pretty damn close to true, then it really doesn't scale, and I'm happy to say that it doesn't. Whereas if you come over to this Daisy Walker deck, her ability is going to scale directly with the tomes. And as you increase your tomes, the value of this ability is going to spike up. Additionally, because you're eventually getting Old Book of Lore and Abigail Foreman, these represent huge spikes, where the Daisy ability literally doubles in value with Abigail Foreman, and Old Book of Lore translates this Daisy tome action into drawing through your deck, which means that literally every upgrade in the deck is proportionally increasing the value of that tome action. Daisy's ability is a wonderful example of an ability that does scale and really meaningfully scales with time passing in the campaign, with experience added to your deck. Now, having just talked about the tremendous importance of Scenario 1 and how scaling up over the course of the campaign doesn't save rogues from bad early games, that's essentially the argument I'm about to make why scaling abilities aren't incredibly important. Don't get me wrong, rogues would be worse if they didn't scale. Scaling does matter. But again, you have to take into account the fact that Scenario 1 is the most important. Everyone scales up when you get all the victory in Scenario 1. Being incredibly strong in Scenario 1 is more important than being incredibly strong in Scenario 8, and generally, pretty much everyone is incredibly strong in Scenario 8. When you have fully experienced decks, you're basically gods. So my first point against considering the value of Rex's ability as a scaler is simply that scaling in general is overrated. You can probably beat Dim Carcosa with level 0 Rex and level 0 Mark Harrigan, right? Like, scaling doesn't matter that much because everyone scales to levels that far outstrip the campaign. But additionally, scaling doesn't matter that much because once you've scaled, you've gotten past the most important part of the game. It does matter, it's not a non-factor, but to really emphasize it as a reason that one character is better than the other requires them to have similar starting points. That's the second and more major issue with the argument of ability scaling being part of why Rex is bad. Other investigators, they have an ability that scales up. It starts as, say, perception level 1 and ends as a hypothetical perception level 4, right? The thing is, deduction as a baseline is nuts. You can argue that a level 0 deduction is better than a level 2 perception. I'm not quite sure I want to take that argument, but the point is that it's not clear cut that deduction isn't better than cards that do cost experience. Everything in this game is apples to oranges. It's very hard to directly compare. But it is very clear that as a baseline value, get a clue every turn is one of the strongest abilities in the game before scaling gets involved. So coming over to Daisy's scaling ability, its power level is all over the place. Sometimes it's Grim Memoir, which is just better than Rex's ability, right? You're probably going to get the clue, and then you're going to draw a card as well. That was just better. Sometimes it's Old Book of Lore without spending a secret. That's basically draw 1, scry 3. Like in terms of power level, those are pretty similar. Draw 1 still a really strong effect. I'm not unhappy about that at all, and all of this is a lightning bolt effectively. If you're spending the secrets though, it's essentially like fast action burning the midnight oil. Like that's the most generally applicable thing I can say. It's gonna be fast gain 2 resources and fast gain up to 2 resources and then fast play another card. So like spending the secrets is probably the strongest thing this is doing, but all 3 of these things are different and the value of the scry and draw depends on whether or not this is a 0 experience, 13 experience, or 50 experience deck, right? It's really hard to nail down exactly what Daisy Walker's ability is doing as it scales up, but the answer is probably that most of the time it is better than getting 1 clue. The issue is that most of the time isn't in scenario 1. Even in like scenario 3, I will think Daisy has scaled up above Rex. I think that is a true and fair argument to make. But in scenario 2, this Rex deck is already finished. Whatever I'm upgrading is bells and whistles. Like, I'll probably upgrade my skills for practice makes perfect, right? Whereas this Daisy deck is still looking at getting Cryptic Research. It's always behind 8 experience compared to what the Rex is doing. But I think the more major issue is that while I'm willing to concede that Daisy's ability scales up to be better than Rex's, which is something I hadn't really thought about before, something I hadn't processed in the game, and part of why I found the tier list worth watching and interesting. What's not clear to me is that it's like really meaningfully better than deduction. Like, is it better to expose yourself to penalty tokens one more time, almost certainly not get punished for it, and then draw a card as well as get the clue? Yeah. How much better is that draw? Well, you're not running Cryptic Research, so, you know, kind of insignificantly, how important is it to get these fast action play events? Sorry, how important is it to turn these cards you're drawing into fast actions that cost you less? Well, for your synergy cards, like, yeah, it's saving you resources and time. For your events, like, I don't really see Daisy decks that have events that are good with that. Like, sure, if you've got Docent in hand, you're about to cycle Old Book of Lore, go ahead, make Midnight Oil fast and play it immediately to gain the resources and then just cycle this out anyway. But like, it's good. Is it really meaningfully better than deduction? I don't really think so. Even though she's scaling up and I do feel like she's gonna do more work than Rex's ability with those books, I don't think it's like a huge amount more. And that's the huge issue with talking about scaling abilities. Not only is it very, very hard, especially with more complicated scalers like Daisy's, to directly compare things in this game, getting a clue is a very high baseline for power. Just because something gets tremendously better as the game goes on and your deck improves in quality, that doesn't mean that it's better than a static ability. I am certain that there are characters with scaling abilities that never get to a point where their ability is better than Rex's, because Rex's ability is that good as a baseline. I think there are 2 big takeaways from me after thinking about the arguments that were made against Rex. The first is it really hammered home for me just how important Scenario 0 is. I mention it frequently, but I don't think I've ever really mentioned how important starting the campaign strong is. And the second thing I think is I do like the idea of acknowledging that character abilities scale. I think that is important. It'd be like not acknowledging that rogues get tremendously better with experience at a rate that I think surpasses other characters. It doesn't make rogues the best, it doesn't make scaling investigator abilities the best, but it is a power of the game, or sorry, a factor of investigator power that I really haven't been acknowledging very much. Anyways, Rex is still absolutely cracked. I don't really know where I put him on my tier list these days. Because right now, I have him as second best behind Amanda Sharp. Because Amanda's so much more broken than him in the late game and still very, very good in the first scenario. And I think Rex is the only other clueer that competes for destroying the clue game in the same way that she does. But there's a very real argument that I'm over-ranking him, that Flexmark is better, that Tony Morgan's more invincible and better at his role, that Daryl Simmons has team utility, that Hardy Walters is probably the best flex character in the game, Jacqueline Fine is the team consistency, Ashcan Pete breaks scenarios in half. I could move Rex like all the way down to here and say the characters above him are fundamentally more unfair. And I think there's a very real argument that Daisy and Rex are in the same ballpark. I think that's true. Also, Daisy's probably better than Wendy, let's be real. Is Daisy probably better than Luke? Have I been convinced by this video to move Daisy and Rex side by side? Maybe. It'll be a cold day in hell when I'm convinced to move Luke down in the tier list. But the point is that I think there are very real arguments that I am generally too kind to Rex compared to investigators that warp the game in unique ways. I think there's a very real argument that I'm underranking Daisy, that there are aspects of the game I was missing, and that's a big part of why I wanted to make this video and to really think about the arguments against Rex. At the end of the day, I still think Rex is incredible. He's a seeker with no opportunity cost, free to invest into anything, and 5 splash cards from the entire card pool that can basically let him do whatever he wants with them. If you want to play a Farsight character and play big hand stuff that uses like read the signs, this is one of the only characters with access to that. You shouldn't, but it is. You want to run green assets and then pay for them with Faustian bargains, get cigarette cases, get Leo? Rex is about to be one of only 2 investigators that can do that because we're finally getting the Seeker Rogue. But these splash cards matter. They do a ton. The lack of opportunity cost, the incredibly powerful baseline for his ability. I think the main thing in the tier list that was holding Rex down really was that they play on a higher difficulty than I do, and that is fair and valid. But I think the arguments used to explain why Rex was where they were are not arguments that I agree with. I think they're probably underranking Rex because he is very bag vulnerable if you're playing on higher difficulties, and it forces you to do stuff like commit to playing death, commit to playing like charisma immediately. And suddenly Rex is losing some of these benefits, right? You're not buying cryptic research immediately, you're buying a tarot and a charisma. And because you need the additional book on that higher difficulty, suddenly Rex has a niche. Every 4-stat investigator has a niche, and that hurts Rex disproportionately more than a character that just starts with a 5 like Daisy. Because at the end of the day, I don't think they're just wrong. I think they have interesting ideas that aren't fully developed, and I think I agree with the hot take that on hard, Daisy's better than Rex, and Luke goes way the fuck down because the scenario 1 becomes garbage instead of fine, right? But on normal, I still think Rex is easily S tier, though I was putting him way too high on the tier list. And on higher difficulties, I think my eyes have really been opened as to how much that hurts Rex as I was trying to entertain the arguments given to me. And I like the thought experiment really helping me to refine how I feel about some aspects of the game. That session 1 is disproportionately more important than any other scenario. That scaling exists for investigator cards, not just like general things in the deck, and that it means you need to more complicatedly evaluate. More complicatedly? That's the words I went with, dear God. It means you need a more complex or thoughtful analysis of things like Will Yorick and Daisy Walker, where their value changes with the composition of your deck. Anyway, the fact that Yorick is a fighter that gives 7 experience to his team probably does put him a little bit higher on the tier list. I'll put him above Wendy. By the way, that's a point I called in that video. I'm looking forward to watching more people make more tier lists. I'm going to catch up on the rest of this tier list. I stopped watching pretty much immediately to talk about Rex. But that'll be all for now. I'm Rather Incoherent. Thank you for watching. Thank you to the Patreon supporters who have somehow stuck with me through my hiatus. It's greatly appreciated. And I'll see all of you in the next one.